What is it like going to God, and what is God all about? What is the experience like? As you, if you've read things like Saint Teresa, Saint John of the Cross, or the poems of Rumi or Kabir or Hafiz, or any of the mystic poetic literature, Gospel of Ramakrishna, things like that, you will, or if you read the book of Revelations in the Bible, you will see that what we're dealing with are level upon level of reality. There are many, many planes of reality one goes through. There are planes that involve different colors, like Aldous Huxley used to say to me, the reason we love jewels so much is because we have memories of the astral planes we existed on, where those were like the pebbles we walked on all the time. And there are planes, it's beautifully described in Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a very familiar book to many of you, I'm sure. As you get up into the higher realms, it gets finer and finer. The numbers of beings are fewer. They are higher. They are more beings like beings that are just luminous. They're like light beings. They are just incredible. Being in their presence just fills you with a type of ecstasy that is, it is not describable in physical counterpart, in physical terms. Bliss and ecstasy and rapture are components of the higher planes. But actually, in entering into God, you go beyond any of these experiences, because experience itself is a dualistic concept. It's already the distinction between the experiencer and that which is experienced. And when you enter into God, when you merge into God, experiencer and experience become one. And at that point, you are all of it. All the polarities have wrapped back in on themselves. Pleasure, pain, dark, light, future, past, bliss, hell, suffering, loss, gain, all of it all comes together. So you are having the essence of all possible experiences of the universe, and you are it. You become the thing itself. And that is not describable, because a description is an experiential description. All you can say is you are the universe at that moment. The closest correlate to that we know of in our daily human existence is the sexual orgasm, at which moment we transcend our own psychological separateness and merge, albeit maybe a brief moment or a few moments, into that which is beyond ourself. And we know at that moment what that's like. And you know how much that experience is treasured by man and sought by man. And there are many experiences like skydiving, or experiences like in skiing, where you push yourself right to the edge of a moment where you, through the crisis or the excitement or speed or the relation of forces, you get right beyond your own self-consciousness, and you become part of you become the skiing rather than a conscious skier. You just get lost into it because the demand of the rigor of the thing, it pulls you in. Those are called traumatic experiences in psychological terms of it. Now, the sexual analog is important in what is called Tantra, because the process of Tantra is using let me start again. In the Bible, it is talked about being prepared as the bride of God. That image is the essence of Tantra. For Tantra is the relationship of energies between that being which seeks God, the seeker, and God, or a love affair with God. And it is a love affair that involves all the energies that you can bring to bear, and ultimately it involves the merging into all the energy of the universe. There are two images in Indian literature. One is called the lingam and one is called the yoni. The lingam is actually the phallus, and the yoni is actually the vagina. And to understand true Tantra, you must understand that this is not concerned with the relationship between man and woman on the physical plane. That's a misunderstanding of Tantra. The true Tantra involves the relation of man or woman to God. And in that case, each of us, as we seek God, becomes both the lingam and the yoni. We are both that phallus which penetrates into the universe of forms, which is called the Divine Mother within the devotional systems. And we also become the yoni, or the mother, which receives the father, which receives the universe into itself, or receives the formless into itself. It's the meeting of Shiva and Shakti in Hindu literature. It's the merging of the form and the formless. And that is actually a sexual, though not a genital, union. And once you have started to taste of that kind of orgasm, you can much more readily understand how a being like me can be brahmachari, can be sexually continent, can be celibate without feeling a great loss. For what you are getting, for if you're an intelligent person, you don't give up something as gratifying as sex unless you're getting something a hell of a lot better. And I can say quite out front that my communion with God is infinitely more on every dimension than anything I ever got from food or sex or automobiles or motorcycles or airplanes or scuba diving or skiing, or all of them put together simultaneously, including hot baths with incense and wine, right? Recently in going to God, you have to consume all of your attachments and all of the things you work with, things like lust and anger and doubt and fear. You have to face them, and you have to allow their existence, and then you have to sit through them, acknowledge them, let them be, and offer them up and get on with it, instead of sitting holding on to them all the time. Every time I begin to get angry, instead of letting the anger develop and become a big deal, at that moment, the minute I get the seed of the anger, I say, look, this anger isn't going to get me to God. Here, God, you take the anger. I don't want it. And I give up the anger, because the anger's not going to get me there. And I'm at the point now where all I want to do is be with God. That's it. I'd rather be with God than sit around being angry. Okay? It's as simple as that. In the same way, I'd rather be with God than sit around being lustful, or sit around doubting, or sit around being frightened, or sit around being lazy, or whatever the thing is. Okay? Well, one of the things I've had to deal with is power. And because I come out of a Jewish middle-class, upwardly mobile background, my father was a president of a railroad. He founded Brandeis University, Einstein Medical School. He's been always very active in power things in America, Jewish America, except the railroad, which wasn't particularly Jewish, I must admit. And but power has always been a big deal in my cultural background. And I began to see, I remember one day Maharaji sitting on his bench. Here I saw this being who could walk through walls, appear in two places at once, read everybody's mind, bring the dead back to life. He had all those powers, at least, you know. And there he watched Indira Gandhi go by with her Cadillacs and Jeeps and generals and elephants and all that, and he said to me, look at all that, and it's just a worldly king. And that blew my mind. At that moment, I saw through the whole game. Well, recently I was in California, and I was at in a motel in Berkeley, and a fellow who had just interviewed me called me up, and he said, if you're going to be home in a little while, Jerry Brown would like to come by and say hello, who was the governor of California. And I couldn't help thinking of Maharaji's image, you know. I thought, a worldly king. And I had met Jerry once before, and I was fascinated by Jerry because he had spent some years, I think, as a Jesuit in a Jesuit monastery. I think it was a Jesuit. And I remember talking to him about St. Ignatius Loyola and the rules of the St. Ignatius rule. And I realized that he was living out his work as a governor from that frame of reference, which made him a much more interesting governor than somebody who was basically a politician, right? And I knew that Jerry Brown was spending time in Zen monasteries and was like a very deep guy in a philosophical and spiritual sense. Well, he came in, and he came in very gently and quietly, no fanfare, no guards, no nothing like that. And he sat down in the motel room, and he and I spent maybe, I'd say, 40, 50 minutes really just talking about God, talking about the spirit, talking about the mystic tradition, about different saints in Christian literature, about some of the work I was doing, about my guru. And I found him extremely direct and open. We had long eye contact, which there was no hedging. We were merely assessing and being with one another as two beings. I wanted nothing from him. He wanted nothing from me. We were merely sharing a moment in the cosmic dance. We both had our own trips going. It was exquisite. I mean, there was just no needful state, and which I'm sure is rare for him, because everybody must want something from somebody like that. You know? And as he left, I walked out with him to the car, and I was barefoot walking through the motel lobby, and we went through. Nobody noticed him. He'd sent no vibration out, I'm the governor. He got into a small private car and drove away. And I realized that I had just seen a master at work. I mean, he was not a full master, because I can still see the edges, but still somebody in master training, in the true sense of master, that kind of wise man training, you know. He still has power needs, which will make him, you know, that's necessary for his game, in a way. Now it's just the question of how deep his other commitment is, his more profound spiritual commitment. I think he's an interesting politician, though. And I like people in that dance. It's like meeting Huey Newton and looking into his eyes and seeing that same clarity and saying, Huey, where'd you get that clarity? And he says, I got it in solitary confinement, you know, because then I had lots of time to go inside. Or I keep meeting a few beings like that, you know, every now and then, and I'm always Suzuki Roshi in San Francisco, the Zen teacher, was such a being. Grandpa Joe, an American Indian in the Taos Pueblo, who just died about last week, was such a being, very beautiful, that kind of clarity of being. Kalu Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan Lama, very old, beautiful man, such a being. My guru was such a being. All different levels of depths, I mean, the people I've been listing. But Jerry can't yet see the cosmic humor fully. He's still taking it awful seriously, you know, because there's a chuckle that exists behind the whole cosmos. And when you really find a wise man, like perhaps Don Juan is, I don't know. It's hard to tell because it comes through Castaneda, and he isn't a wise man yet, you know. But you sense that chuckle. You always sense the lightness, the dance, the lightness, the humor in the whole thing. Not in a cynical way and not in a put-down way, but just a lightness, a dancing quality. That's why Shiva dances. The dance of the universe. It's such a lightness about it. Tim Leary and I shared some very high and ecstatic moments together. We did a dance at Harvard, all through the world in a way. In Copenhagen, we had to flee Copenhagen because I gave mushrooms to some professors and editors of newspapers in the Royal Copenhagen Hotel in the middle of the night, and the next day the headlines said, Harvard professor gives swamp poison to... We've had many melodramas together. We've gotten thrown out of some of the best countries. And there's a lot of love between Tim and me. Tim is a total rascal. He's also a fighter. And he also likes to take on the establishment. I'm not that kind of a person. I'm very different. I'm almost more of a heretic, but less of a revolutionary. Tim and I have been together through a lot of his stuff, and about a year ago, we spent a couple of days in the waiting room at San Luis Obispo prison sharing our ideas together. And at the end I realized that we had really grown apart, that we love each other as human beings, but we really don't share the same philosophical base anymore. I've really gone deep into mysticism, and he's much more of a visionary. He's much more of a utopianist, and I'm much more of a mystic. I'm really interested in the relation of this realm to other realms, and he's interested in optimizing this realm, really, much more so. And he's much more interested in astral dances, and I'm much more interested in that, in God, in that which is beyond all forms. You know? So that I think when Tim and I meet again, there will be love between us. There will be the sharing of a lot of warm memories, but I don't think we have work to do anymore. I really don't. Not at this moment, because Tim seems to know what he's doing and be busy doing it, and I certainly am busy doing what I'm doing. I don't need Tim. Unless Tim needs me, I don't think there's any reason for us to be together at this point. Yeah. I don't think you should cling to a collaboration just because it was terribly functional and beautiful at a moment. I honor Tim. He was a great teacher for me. I don't think he's a teacher anymore for me. And I think I've gone beyond the teaching he had to give me now. And I honestly, I think, and this is a hard one to say, I think I have a teaching to give Timothy now. Whether he will ever be willing to receive that, because one of the differences between Tim and I is that I was always the student, and Tim never liked being a student. See, Tim always knew, and I always was finding out. And even in my relationship with him, I was 10 years younger than Tim, and I was the young person he was guiding through. And that allowed me to go to a guru and surrender to a guru, which Tim could never do. It's a very, no. Yeah, Tim has had a lot of heavy karma this lifetime. He's worked with it gracefully, but it is heavy karma.
I've never had an interview where I've had to ask so few questions and get so much back.